AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Alldus podcast. I'm your host, Ben Sparks, and today we are continuing with our ServiceNow series, showcasing some of the best and brightest talent and technical leadership from across the ecosystem. Today, we are lucky to host Tameem Hourani from RapDev. Tameem currently holds the position of principal at RapDev and has previously worked at organizations including EMC and Wayfair. He's held an exciting career so far and has kindly agreed to share some of his experiences and some career advice that he's learned on the way. I'll let him talk more about RapDev. However, they're an exciting company and they're in the ServiceNow ecosystem, really kind of finding that position where ServiceNow meets DevOps, specializing in ITOM and DevOps delivery. Tameem, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. Excited to be on. Appreciate the intro.
No, thank you. So, Tameem, let's start by giving our listeners a bit of an overview of who they're listening to and yourself.
Sure. Yeah, right on. Awesome. So I guess I'll start kind of, maybe I'll even start with how I landed in Boston, came here for school in 2006, obviously Boston-based. Started my career at EMC, a Boston-based storage company that most of you might be familiar with. They eventually got acquired by Dell. And then a few years later, I moved to PTC, which is another Boston-based company, Parametric. They were the first guys to invent CAD with a product called Creo before AutoCAD actually did it. So that was their claim to fame. Spent about a year there, and then lastly, before joining RapDev, I was at Wayfair for about 3 years. And in all three companies, actually ended up deploying ServiceNow. I think at EMC it was still back in Fuji. So way back when, and then kind of upgraded, iterated, etc. The more recent implementations were kind of non-standard. At PTC, we were, I think, one of the first customers to use cloud management, CMP. And at Wayfair, we were one of the first customers to do solely API-based implementation deployment. So we didn't really have a UI. It wasn't used for IT like most ServiceNow implementations were used. We really used it as a back-end kind of glue to really connect a lot of our CI/CD tools through APIs. It was very interesting for the ServiceNow guys because we got around their licensing model. So we didn't really have, I think we had 5 users. We were paying for 5 users, but we had like 2,000 engineers using the platform. So I learned a lot doing that and did a lot of talks and ultimately jumped to RapDev and started really taking what I learned at Wayfair and sharing it with customers.
Nice. No, thanks for that. And it's fair to say you've worked in a wide range of roles, like you mentioned, sort of from production, even though sort of all very ServiceNow focused. Looking back at your career, what would you say have been some of the career tipping points and, highlights that you've had along the way?
I think one of the biggest ones. So, I mean, it's a little ironic. My first job was my biggest job, team speaking, right? So obviously biggest company I've ever worked at and biggest team I've worked on. And that was very intimidating, of course. Came with a lot of learnings. Big company, slower company, a lot of opportunity to kind of learn from people that have been there for a while. PTC was my first exposure to non-IT. So the interesting thing at PTC was we were actually responsible for running PTC's cloud offering. Still using PTC product, but hosting them in AWS and exposing them out to customers as kind of a hosted platform. And then the biggest tipping point, if you want to call it that, or the most interesting, I would say, piece of my career was really at Wayfair, simply because I was working on the product itself. I wasn't working in IT. And what that meant was we weren't really deploying ServiceNow for IT users. We weren't really focused on making sure our systems uptime was available for things like SAP, Oracle, email, things like that. It was really solely around the product, which was Wayfair.com. So managing Wayfair.com brought a ton of exposure, learned so much. Really, really, really smart people at Wayfair. I'll never forget the people I worked with there. And I actually will never forget the week I started was extremely intimidating, going into an environment knowing that I probably knew the least about anything going on there.
Right.
So very grateful for that experience. And yeah, I'd say that was probably the biggest shift, was moving to the product side.
Nice. And as we mentioned, on our previous calls with you, advice and mentorship to our listeners is a kind of key part of this podcast. Looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self, kind of coming through the ranks in some of these bigger organizations or the startups?
I pissed a lot of people off in my career. I think just because I thought it was the right thing to do, or wanted to do something and someone said no and I went off and did. Actually, once at EMC, I managed to piss off our CISO at the time, and he was the head of security at RSA, because EMC owned RSA, and that made its way down, and I almost got fired. And I basically told him we couldn't do something that he wanted to do, and I decided not to do it. Looking back at that, is pretty stupid. I think I probably should have kept a good relationship with him.
Okay.
But that's one of the biggest things, right? Is just take advice as early on as possible, and I've learned to do that later in my career. Unfortunately, I wish I had learned to do that sooner. And I think don't be afraid to take risks and move around. I see people stay at jobs for 10, 15, 20 years, and I think that's crazy. Get out there, see what's around, exposure, right? Technology moves very quickly. The more you move around, the more you'll be exposed to. Those are, for me, very big things. Don't ponder either. I actually, there was a really cool podcast by the founder of Netflix. I actually shared with some of the guys in the office last week. But one of the biggest things he was saying, and it's very true, is don't think too much, right? Just do things. If they fail, do other things. Don't spend too much time planning, because you'll never plan enough, right? There's always more stuff to keep planning. So I think he said, think less, do more, or something to that effect, which really resonated with me.
It's interesting. Yeah, I was also reading something the other day about, being a perfectionist is really procrastination sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting. And look, I think as I'm approaching my 40th birthday, and in my old age, I've definitely been more open to feedback. But I think that is also a theme we're hearing here, right? Is, feedback is not criticism. Feedback is just feedback, and being open to it. How to take that is a coaching session itself. So I'm really, really glad you brought that up, because I know it's something that everyone struggles with. So as we come back to the present, who are RapDev? For our listeners, sorry, that haven't heard of you guys.
Yeah, right on. So we are. So the reason we exist is, while I was at Wayfair, so Wayfair is a public company, PCI, SOX, audits, etc. But Wayfair also deployed code to production about 600 times a day. And if I had never spent any time at Wayfair, I would tell you that's impossible to do. There's no way to do it. But the guys figured out a way to do it, and that was really that was the eye-opening piece, right? So for me, it was and it was all technology first. Lead with technology, lead with codifying whatever problems you're trying to solve, and then you'll solve the business problems. So having been exposed to that there and learning from the guys how to do that, and then we started talking about it at a ServiceNow forum, ServiceNow knowledge, et cetera. And there was a lot of interest, right? How did you guys do it? And I think that for me was the biggest driver. Is okay. I think if I left Wayfair and started to really help other companies solve the same problems, it's a very common problem. Everybody's writing code. As long as the team's writing code, you're public or you're regulated, right? Finance, insurance, healthcare, you're gonna run into some bottleneck somewhere. Could be change, could be CAB, could be discovery. There's so many different bottlenecks. So figuring out how to solve that and sharing it with other companies or other teams is really what drove us to be where we are. I think our mission, if you want to call it that, is to really, really bring a very, very modern take onto the ServiceNow platform, instead of kind of sticking to ITIL and sticking to legacy processes and whatnot. It's how do you push the boundaries on the platform and the products that ServiceNow is putting out to make them a lot more relevant to the DevOps ecosystem, CI/CD pipelines, cloud first, cloud native, microservices, and so on. That's really who we are and who we're really focused on staying. It's very easy to lose focus and to kind of get scattered, but as long as we stick within those boundaries, I think we'll continue to position ourselves in a very, very unique place in the ServiceNow space.
Awesome. And you've probably answered my next question, but why were you drawn to RapDev?
Yeah, exactly, right. It's that it's the feedback at the conferences, and everyone should try to speak at those conferences. The
Uh-huh.
ServiceNow always looks for stories. They want to hear what customers are doing. Um, there's always a good opportunity to share a story with someone, and that's really that frankly what helped me get the exposure around what we were solving at Wayfair. But it was doing the Now forums, doing the knowledge sessions, going to the conferences, talking and meeting people that really solidified that there's a need for this in the ServiceNow space.
Fantastic. So I really liked the values actually on your
Yeah,
webpage. Talk to us a little bit more about those.
sure. We actually just redid our website, and those didn't exist before.
That looks great.
Thank you. We our values, transparency, right? I think that for me personally, that's the most important thing. Is both, and it says both internal, external. What it really means is both with the team that we work with on a daily basis, but more importantly with the customers. If things aren't going well, don't try to hide it. Don't try to beat around the bush. Always be transparent. Let's solve problems together. Customers will appreciate it, and your engineers, your coworkers, everyone will appreciate it. And sometimes it's not what you want to hear, right? Sometimes it's not good news, or it's not what you're expecting, but it's always better than trying to kind of kick the can down the road. Focus on your customers. Big thing I learned at Wayfair. If your customers are happy, everything else will follow. Repeat customers. I mean, we're starting to see this now. We're relatively young at RapDev. I think about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. But we're starting to see a lot of our customers renew with us, stay with us, trust us, and that's really what helps us grow. Engineering wizardry is just a funky term that I think we decided sounded cool, but just stay super focused, right? We're not going to go do CSM and HR and GRC and everything else under the sun. We're going to stay focused on what we know, and that's the cloud and that's DevOps, and know it really, really well. So when you talk to a customer about it, the customer trusts you and realizes that that's exactly what you guys are focused on. Agility and collaboration, I think, go hand in hand. Actually, all of our customers are in our Slack channel. They can Slack us whenever they want, whenever they have questions. And they have access to our Trello boards, so they can see the progress on the projects we're working on. So that kind of ties in agility, collaboration, and transparency. But the tighter you are with the feedback loop, with the conversations with customers, I think just the better outcome the project's going to have as a whole.
Love those. No, they're really, really cool and probably resonate across no matter what industry you're in. And by the way, engineering wizardry does sound really cool. So I know that the value proposition of RapDev is to sort of make developers' lives easier. Yeah, I'm not technical. Can you give me a bit of an overview about sort of how that particularly works? But do feel to go. You can go technical because our listeners are.
It's not very technical. It's not a technical problem, right? You're solving it with engineering, but the problem that a lot of engineers run in, as an engineer, you want to automate and script as much as you can, right? The less work you have to do, the better. Eric Ledyard used to always say chat ops, and I'll probably make him listen to this podcast when we're done. But chat ops is essentially the universal UI. So if you can bring something to chat, nobody has to be trained on how to use chat. Nobody needs to do like a 30-minute crash course on how Slack works. You open Slack, you open Teams, and it just works. So the more you can bring into chat, the more intuitive it is, right? And the better the experience is. So what we tend to drive a lot is the more ServiceNow interactions you can bring to Slack, the more seamless and frictionless that experience is going to be. You might still need to do approvals, but instead of having to pull up ServiceNow, logging in, look for your changes, and click approve, you can click a button in Slack and go on about your day. And that's really what drives a lot of that better user experience. It's not so much the engineering piece; it's the lack of context switching, swivel chair, whatever buzzword you want to use. That's what drives a lot of our chat ops implementations.
Awesome. No, thanks for that. It's really helpful. And how does your tech fit into a customer's business?
How does our tech fit into a customer's business? Tech is part of every business today, right? I mean, especially development. It's tough to find a business that's really not doing much software development. And the quicker you can get code out, the quicker you can realize the value, the quicker your customer is happy, which means more revenue. It's cyclical, very cyclical. The challenge we're solving is that in regulated industries, it's tough, right? It's tough to show auditors or to keep track of everything you're doing so auditors are happy. And that's where the DevOps product comes in from ServiceNow, which we've been working very closely with them on. But it's essentially, how do you make sure that when you need to keep that audit trail and the paper trail available for your developers, it doesn't come at the cost of slowing them down. So automating your audit trail collection, your commits, your pipeline runs, your automated testing, even your approvals, right, need to all be captured dynamically, and that's where the module comes into play. So really allowing that quick time to value, very fast automated approvals on changes is, I think that's key to helping customers build velocity.
Fantastic. And one of the things we're looking at here in the podcast as well is kind of best practice and advice, and coming through implementations and project roadmaps is a big part of that. How, what does one usually look like for you? So like what are your usual roadmaps, and how do you go about sort of making sure that works out?
One of the things that I've seen a lot, and I think we've personally shied away from, is all these like, let's build for 9 months and then have a huge go live with a go live cake and everyone's celebrating. But for 9 months, you've owned these licensing that you've done nothing with, right? You've paid for software that you can't really use. We really shy away from that. It's fragment it and deliver it as quickly as possible. Even if you're not delivering everything, right? You might have to deliver on one module this month and another module next month. But incremental wins and very, very low time to value, that's what's really going to resonate with customers. Find a small team within your organization, start with them, find a small, maybe a champion that's willing to kind of stick their neck out. That's always going to give you a much better story to tell than waiting for the whole project to be completed and then going live and then debugging for another 3 months and so on. It's really just kind of agile versus waterfall if you think about it. But the faster you get stuff into production, the faster your users are going to use it and the faster you're going to get feedback on it. And it's just iterative from there.
Nice. And any user cases or success stories you can share?
On the same topic, Eric Ries wrote a book called The Lean Startup, which is really where the idea comes from, which is a good kind of quick read. But conceptually, I mean, I didn't make any of this up, right? You just read about it. And that the whole concept there is from him. So might be worth, if anyone's listening, to take a quick look at that, The Lean Startup. But yeah, use cases, we've had a very large bank, I think Big Five probably, reduce their change process from I think 22 days it used to take them to get a change submitted and approved because of all their kind of CAB meetings and approvals and all down to about 2 hours. So as long as you've got all the evidence you need and you've got all the data to back it up, you're really moving away from a subjective approval, a human who, frankly, sometimes the people approving your change have no clue what it means, right? Like they're looking at your code. They might have never even written a line of code in their life, but they're approving your change to deploy some code to production. It's a very, very subjective methodology. So moving away from that and using data is what's really going to help, and that's really what drives a lot of our projects. But yeah, from 22 days to 2 hours is one of these banks that we worked with. We just helped another bank we're doing a webinar with, I think in April, talk about their success story. They're onboarding 26 teams in the next 2 months onto this new DevOps module. So that's a great one. Keep an eye out for that on LinkedIn from ServiceNow. But lots of these, right? If you're in a regulated industry and you're trying to do change management, chances are it's a very, very slow process for you. And that's where our specialization comes in.
Amazing. No, that's really clear and concise case study. I really enjoyed that. Tameem, thanks very much for taking the time. Is there anything you'd like to add before we call it a day?
Yeah, I'll throw out a shameless plug. We're always hiring.
Go for it.
Looking for engineers, looking for contributors to our open source projects. If you think what we're doing is cool or you're curious to learn more, reach out, drop us a note on LinkedIn, on our website, rapdev.io. We have a Slack channel for a lot of different developers and ServiceNow engineers that join us. So feel free to pop in there as well, just to hang out. But like I said, if you have any ideas you'd like to share with us, or just want to join the team at all, we are hiring and would love to hear from you.
You got it. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ben.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.